So the 9th edition Adeptus Mechanicus Codex was released a while ago, and I haven't done any coverage on the book whatsoever. So I figured today would be a good opportunity to dive in to the 9th edition Adeptus Mechanicus Codex and talk about the best units in this book. Let's do it! What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're going to be talking about the top 6 best units in Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, I haven't really done much talking about this book whatsoever, outside of the initial launch announcements that Games Workshop made, and there's a pretty good reason for that. We'll talk about that at the end of the video. As always, if you enjoy this style of content, I would appreciate it if you'd give a like and subscribe. All the YouTube stuff, you've heard it before, but it does really help out the channel, helps me grow, and tells me what kind of content people like so I can do more of that. Now, before we get started, one thing that I think it's important to note is that I'm currently recording this video with no FAQs or erratas available for this codex, and there's some stuff in the codex that is a little funky. Some things that I'm not 100% sure will survive an errata, but as right now we have no communication from Games Workshop whatsoever on this codex, I will be talking about them basically rules as written. So there's going to be a couple entries on here that could potentially change in the future if rules were elected to be changed. And if Games Workshop comes in with a big update to the Adeptus Mechanicus Codex, I think it would probably make sense to go back and do a retread of this list. But for right now, we're just doing it straight out of the book. So starting down here in number 6, we have the Tech Priest Dominus, a pretty ubiquitous character in Adeptus Mechanicus lists for a couple different reasons. First off, coming in at 75 points, this guy isn't the most bank-breaking character. Although there are cheaper characters available in the faction if you want some cheap detachments. Dominus is a pretty good include, especially for his 6-inch aura of reroll 1s to hit for Forge World core units. Now, that's any core unit inside the Forge World, so it can hit Scutarii, it can hit Electro Priests, anything with that core keyword, which is phenomenal. In addition, having Tech Priest characters in your list also give you access to the Holy Order abilities. These are sort of chapter command style abilities that a lot of factions are getting. We talked about Blessings of the Faithful in the Adeptus Sororitas Codex, and these are very much a similar style, and give you access to some powerful abilities. Now, the mechanic of Holy Order traits is a little bit weird. First off, all of them give you a 1 CP refund on a different type of stratagem. This is, I think, actually one of the first times that we're seeing the stratagem categories actually come into play mechanically, which is really nice to see. For example, Janitors give you a 1 CP discount on a battle tactic stratagem. Artisans give you a discount on a war gear stratagem. So all of these should net you a CP back for that points investment. Each of them is broken into 2 separate abilities, only one of which is active at a time, and swapping between the abilities is actually a little difficult. It requires a full round action that starts in your command phase, meaning that that character is totally useless for a phase, but once the action is completed at the start of your next command phase, he becomes useful again and gains his aura abilities back. Now, the downside is that, for the most part, all of these are aura abilities, and if we're talking about a unit like a Manipulus, they're already bringing an aura ability with them, and those aura abilities will turn off as long as that character is performing that action. So the weirdest thing about these abilities is that in order to enhance them, you do have to sacrifice the character for a round, and that is a little bit of a tough pill to swallow, but there are some good ones in here. For example, Magi gives you access to Overloaded Safeguards, which is exploding 6s to hit in the shooting phase. Logi allows you to ignore cover. Artisans gives +1 strength to a unit's ranged attacks, which is phenomenal for something that's packing a ton of stubbers or similar profiles. Moving up to number 5, we have a unit that we've talked a lot about on this channel. This is the Archaeopter Fuselav. Now, the Fuselav has seen a couple changes from its 8th edition incarnation, but overall, it has retained its incredible power. The Archaeopter stat block on their datasheet is one of the most phenomenal aircraft profiles in the entire game, if not the best. Coming in at a mind-boggling toughness of 7, alongside a 3+ save and 10 wounds, which is a good wounds characteristic to have because it means you only give up 1 victory point on Bring It Down. The Archaeopter Fuselav is one of the most efficient and resilient flyers in the entire game. They are only 130 points apiece, up to 150 if you elect to take their shaft launchers, which you could take them or leave them for the most part. That is expensive, and you could just be fitting additional Archaeopters in your list for those extra points. They come packing 4 Heavy Stubbers for a grand total of 16 Strength 4 shot, and their bomb rack has been improved from their previous version, now rolling 6 hits onto a vehicle with the potential to deal a mortal wound on each 4+. It still hits infantry units the same as it did in 8th edition, rolling up to 10 dice, 1 for each model in the unit, and dealing a mortal wound on a 4+, which means this thing, on average, as long as it's hitting a reasonably sized infantry unit, deals 5 mortal wounds a turn in addition to its standard shooting. Now, in fairness, it did lose a little bit of maneuverability from the previous version in that it can no longer advance and get an extra 20 inches of movement. That's just been entirely removed from the datasheet. It just advances like normal now. But considering that it starts at a 50-inch movement already, that doesn't actually make that much of a difference. You should be able to get your Archaeopters wherever you need them, especially since they retained their maneuverable craft rule, which allows them to pivot twice during their movement. Archaeopter Fuselages are probably the best fire in the game and certainly one of the best units in Adeptus Mechanicus, and you should be expecting to see 2 or 3 of them in every single Adeptus Mechanicus list that you ever play against. Next up, we have a new unit in the Adeptus Mechanicus Codex. This is the Scutarii Marshal for number 4. Given the Codex's newfound focus on Scutarii units, it makes a ton of sense that the Scutarii character would be pretty effective, and he sure is. He brings a passive 6-inch aura that gives Scutarii core units reroll 1s to wound. Combining that with the Dominus entry we talked about earlier in this video, that means you have easy access to reroll 1s to hit and to wound on whatever Scutarii units that you want. In addition, the Scutarii Marshal also allows 1 friendly Scutarii unit in the same Forge World within 9 inches. I actually really like that this is a little bit longer than 6 inches because it is a command phase selection rather than a passive aura, but it does give them the ability to ignore the deprecation effect of their Doctrina Imperative. Doctrina Imperatives are a new mechanic specifically for Scutarii, and they're essentially like a separate canticle that affect only your Scutarii units. Now, generally, those Scutarii will not be affected by canticles of the Omnissiah outside of a couple specific interactions, and each Doctrina has its own benefit and debuff. These benefits include improvements to your armor save at the cost of reducing your movement, or the flip side, improving your movement at the cost of reducing your armor save, but the Scutarii Marshal allows you to ignore that downside. He also gives you access to Scutarii Warlord traits, which have some powerful effects, such as Programmed Retreat, allowing a unit to fall back and shoot. Coming in at only 45 points as well, the Scutarii Marshal, it gives you cheap access to an additional HQ choice without having to cut into the points that you'd be spending on those heavy-hitting guns that you're going to be taking in great numbers in an Adeptus Mechanicus army. Moving on to number 3, this is going to be the first instance where we talk about some rules that may not survive unscathed once this book hits an errata. This is the Tyraxii Sterilizers. Coming in at 19 points a model, these models are a little bit pricey, but when you consider you're getting a 2-wound platform with a 12-inch movement and fly, the ability to innately deep strike, as well as a 5+ invulnerable save, and the ability to fall back and charge, with access to some very powerful stratagems, Tyraxii actually seem pretty good. Outside of the unit champion, every model in the unit comes with a 12-inch range Phosphor Torch, which is a flamer-style weapon that automatically hits its target with D6 Strength 4 hits, but comes packing an AP value, which is always nice to have. The big benefit of Tyraxii, though, is that Tyraxii keyword, because it gives them access to the Booster Thrust stratagem, which, for 1 CP, allows you to pick this unit up at the end of your turn and return them into reserve. That allows you to then deep strike them back onto the table at the start of your next turn in the reinforcement step, make their attacks, charge, fight people, and then, at the end of the subsequent turn, use that Booster Thrust stratagem again for 1 CP to pull them off the table, entirely uninteractable by your opponent. This means that in the right situation, Tyraxii Sterilizers, assuming you have enough CP to fuel that Booster Thrust every turn, cannot be attacked by your opponent. Even being forced to deep strike down onto the table with a 12-inch range gun, these guys will be able to deal some significant damage, especially to screening infantry or random objective secured chaff that you're going to be clearing in the late game, which means that over the course of the game, they're going to be attritioning down your opponent's important models through repeated use of that ability to pull back off the table and deep strike again. Whether or not this interaction survives, I'm not 100% sure, but it it does make this unit incredibly good, not only at scoring objectives, but slowly attritioning your opponent's army into dust. They can pop off the table every turn, come back in to score engage in all fronts, or a similar secondary wherever is required. They can even perform actions, like retrieve Octarius data, and once that action is completed at the end of your turn, you can just pull them back off the table and put them back into Deep Strike to do it again next turn. This unit is an incredibly powerful utility unit, also good at killing infantry, and just has a lot of attacks in melee as well. They have swooping strikes, which is the equivalent of shock assault, meaning they're coming in with 3 base attacks, 4 on the unit leader alongside his taser goad, which could potentially mean he gets some exploding 6s with that strength 6 AP1 profile, which means they're pretty good in every phase. Traxii sterilizers are definitely going to be an auto include in a lot of Adeptus Mechanicus lists, especially for this interaction with the booster thrust stratagem. Moving on to our number 2 pick. Let's talk about the Skitarii Vanguard. Now, these models went from being a unit that you relatively rarely saw, although they did have some cool abilities, especially their Rad Saturation Aura, which was always effective and annoying once you got hit with it, making them the equivalent of Strength 4 a lot of times, meaning they always hit a little bit harder in melee than you expected, and they certainly supported other melee units in the faction, and anything that increased the range of that Rad Saturation Aura was always very effective. But outside that, you never really saw them. Until now. And this is another example of an interaction that I'm not 100% sure will survive, but Skitarii Vanguard, especially those armed with radium carbines, have incredible synergy with the enriched round stratagem, which allows them, for the low cost of 1 CP, to automatically wound with all of their hit rolls of a 4+. That's right, all you have to do is roll a 4+ to hit, and that attack automatically wounds. This means that a unit of 20 Skitarii Vanguard with those radium carbines is shooting 60 shots, and without any rerolls to hit, is automatically going to be putting 30 saves onto your opponent's unit. The remaining 30 attacks, most of those will probably hit, especially if you have rerolls in there, and still have the opportunity to wound naturally, meaning that there's a non-zero chance that the Skitarii Vanguard unit, for 160 points, being 8 points per model, is able to put somewhere in the realm of 40 wounds on almost anything they shoot at outside of a vehicle. That means that monsters are going to be shredded by these guys, and even heavily armored infantry units are just going to be killed by the sheer number of saves they're going to be required to make. That's in addition to all of the incredible synergies that Skitarii units now have in the Codex. We just talked about the Skitarii Marshal down in number 4, and he's a perfect example of that. And it's clear to see that Skitarii Vanguard are going to be phenomenally powerful and very difficult to deal with. When you combo them with Forge Worlds like Lucius, which allow you to pick them up off the table in the movement phase and re-deep strike them anywhere you want, even on the top of turn 1, the Skitarii Vanguard are going to be able to get wherever they need to, alpha strike your opponent, and use those 18-inch range carbines to pick apart whatever juicy targets they can hit with them. I think a lot of Adeptus Mechanicus armies are going to be packing 2 units of Skitarii Vanguard these days with those radium carbines just to act as a counterpunch unit to clear out any non-vehicle enemies that are foolish enough to try to come fight your gun line. Now, whether or not this interaction survives, I'm not 100% sure. Radium carbines already automatically wound on unmodified 6s, but the stratagem only making them wound on unmodified 4s instead of 5s or something similar, and only being 1 CP feels like a little bit of an oversight to me. I almost wonder if it was supposed to be a poison effect and work on wound rolls instead of hit rolls, but I have no idea. It does seem to be like an oversight, and it does make this unit phenomenally powerful for that points cost. Moving on to some honorable mentions before we get to our number 1 pick in the Adeptus Mechanicus Codex, let's first talk about the Scorpius Disintegrator. This is another unit that I've talked at length about on the channel, and I think it's an incredibly powerful one in the Adeptus Mechanicus faction, for the most part because of that Belleros Energy Cannon profile. Now, unfortunately, the Belleros Energy Cannon was debuffed a little bit in this version of the datasheet, and the lack of a core keyword on the vehicle means that it doesn't really have the same level of synergies that it had in the previous version. That said, access to indirect fire, especially high volume indirect fire like that Belleros Energy Cannon shot for a relatively low cost, is still applicable, and I do think we are going to see Scorpius Disintegrators occasionally, just not in the 3 of that we saw in basically every list previously. Another unit that's been flying under the radar, probably because of its hover mode for a really long time, is the Archaeopter Stratoraptor. This unit was incredibly powerful in the 8th edition version of the Codex in the 6-flyer Adeptus Mechanicus list, and will still fulfill that role. Now just dealing additional damage because its Quagnus Las cannons have gone up to 3+3 damage instead of a flat D6, and the Heavy Stubber's getting additional shots as well means that this thing is going to be putting out phenomenal damage. Unlike the Fusilov, the Archaeopter Stratoraptor doesn't have access to any bombs, but that does mean that it is incentivized to survive as long as possible, meaning upgrading it with a shaft launcher is actually pretty effective. It shares the same incredible defensive profile that the Fusilov does, coming in at toughness 7 with those 10 wounds, and a 50-inch movement with the ability to pivot twice means that it's maneuverable enough to get around corners and sneak shots with those heavy las cannons, basically anywhere it needs to. The volume of Cognis weapons mounted to this thing's profile means that it has incredible access with the servo-focused Auguries Forge World trait, which somehow survived in this new codex, which means that the Archaeopter Stratoraptor will more often than not be full rerolling all of its hit rolls with its las cannons and its stubbers. In conjunction with Archaeopter Fusilovs, this makes that 6-plane list incredibly powerful. And even if you're playing it in a more standard style of Adeptus Mechanicus list, the Archaeopter Stratoraptor can just fill the role of an Alpha Strike unit, able to move across the table quickly, get whatever shot you need, and blow up a tank or something equally annoying. Adeptus Mechanicus Alpha Strikes, thanks to their incredible firepower, have already been good, and the Archaeopter Stratoraptor just getting additional damage on its weapons means that it's going to be doing that even more. Last but not least, we have an Adeptus Mechanicus staple since its inclusion in Engine War, which I'm not sure what to think of in this new codex. We'll just have to see how the Adeptus Mechanicus faction makes the transition to their new codex, and this is the Cerberus Raider. Now, the Raiders saw a lot of debuffs in this new release. First off, their special stratagem, Tactica Obliqua, was heavily nerfed, only allowing you to perform a normal move, not fall back if you are already engaged, and allowing your opponent to retarget their charge if you do pull them out of charge range. It still is one of the most phenomenal defensive stratagems in the game and does still functionally make this unit impossible to engage. Cerberus Raiders, going down to only 2 wounds, are a little bit more susceptible to medium firepower. Heavy bolters, for example, are going to rip this unit off the table incredibly quickly now, given that they're almost exactly twice as easy to kill against the heavy bolter profile than they were with their 3 wounds. And the focus of the Adeptus Mechanicus Codex has moved away from being artillery and tanks sitting in the back of the table shelling your opponent to being a little bit more aggressively oriented with units like the Scutarii Vanguard we talked about in the number 2 spot, being incentivized to move up the table and act more aggressively. The biggest role of Cerberus Raiders in the previous version of the Codex was to act as Adeptus Mechanicus' front line, although that's not necessarily super necessary anymore now that the rest of the faction is already going to be playing closer to that center of the table. That said, Cerberus Raiders are still a phenomenally powerful unit, bringing 2 shots with their galvanic carbines, as well as the ability to deal mortal wounds on 6s thanks to the sniper rule on their Eye of Cerberus ability. I think there's a real possibility we still see Cerberus Raiders, but probably in less numbers and less ubiquitously than we saw them in the previous version of the Codex. Moving on to the number 1 pick in the Codex is one of the most efficient weapons platforms we've ever seen in Warhammer 40k. This is the Iron Strider Ballistarii. Already a staple in the 8th edition Codex, Iron Striders were just incredibly buffed, getting an additional point to their armor save, as well as an additional 2 shots with their las cannon profile, and D3 plus 3 damage rather than D6 damage on their las cannon profile, all for the low cost of no additional cost at all. They cost the same as they did in 8th edition. Coming in at 65 points for the autocannon version or 75 points for the las cannon version, Iron Striders are one of the most efficient delivery systems for range 48 firepower in the entire game of 40k. They have a very obnoxious profile to take down. Toughness 6 with 6 wounds doesn't look very difficult until you realize that there's probably 5 models in that unit, and you're going to have to get through 30 wounds before you actually take them out. With their newly improved 3+ armor save and access to +1 to their armor save thanks to that Doctrina imperative, potentially light cover as well if you take them in Mars and are able to stack Shroud Psalm on top of that, you can get Iron Strider Ballistarii down to a 1+ armor save, which makes them resilient to even most anti-tank weapons. Iron Striders also have a good way to circumvent the normal downside of these long-ranged artillery-style units by coming in at a base movement of 10 with access to the Dune Strider stratagem, which allows them to get an automatic 6-inch advance and ignore the penalty to advance and fire their weapons. As a side note, I love that the Dune Strider stratagem doesn't apply to Dune crawlers. I guess they're not striding tall enough to get the ability to crawl over dunes efficiently. I don't know if there's much more to say about Iron Strider Ballistarii. They're a pretty concise point-and-click adventure game where you line up a bunch of incredibly powerful long-range attacks on your opponent and blow them off the table. With how cheap the unit is, coming in at 65 to 75 points, I think most Adeptus Mechanicus lists are going to be playing these things, and in great numbers. We talked about the synergy with servo-focused auguries previously as well, and just like the Archaeopters, these guys will benefit from that, having having all their weapons being Cognus means that they will full reroll out to 24 inches with that Forge World trait. Also being core and Skitarii keyworded means they're going to be benefiting from a lot of those auras we were talking about earlier, with easy access to reroll ones to hit and to wound. So yeah, I mean, Iron Strider Ballistarii are phenomenal, and be prepared to get shot directly off the table by hordes of 15 of these. So before I go ahead and wrap up the video, I did want to touch on the Adeptus Mechanicus Codex a little bit. A lot of people asked me if I was going to be doing like a deep dive into the Codex or something similar, and I just really wasn't interested in doing it. I wasn't really excited to talk about Adeptus Mechanicus because I have a lot of trouble being positive about this faction at the state that it's in right now. Some people think I have a problem against Adeptus Mechanicus, like on principle, and while it's true I don't love them because I think their game plan is generally very boring, my concern about the faction is that, especially without some of these abilities being nerfed, I think they are clearly the most powerful faction in Warhammer 40k, with the ability to get incredibly efficient ranged attacks on the table, and especially incredibly efficient aircraft that can run around obscuring terrain and aren't really affected by things that are normally the big downside of gunline style armies, stuff like intervening terrain or your opponent having good defensive positions. We'll have to see how the next couple weeks of competition go, but I imagine that as soon as they become legal, and as soon as the community realizes how powerful the faction is and starts building up their own Adeptus Mechanicus forces, we're going to see this army start winning games to the same extent or even greater than Drukhari did upon their release. Anyway, that's all I had to say about the new Adeptus Mechanicus Codex. Let me know down in the comments if you agreed with my ratings and if you think I missed any units in this codex. And I appreciate you watching all the way to the end of the video. Big thanks also to my patrons over at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise. Also, YouTube channel members, you can join them in the link down below, just next to that subscribe button. And Twitch subscribers, all those folks are phenomenal, and I do love you very much. Thanks again for watching all the way to the end. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.